My name is Angelo, and welcome to Spotterette Media's inaugural Outside the Box panel discussion. Joining us today is retired Master Gunnery Sergeant Dan Masters. We will also be joined by an intelligence expert, AJ Sauls. Our discussion for today will be the presidential election. First, we'll go to AJ. AJ, tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with foreign policy.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. My name is AJ Sauls. I'm the COO, co-founder of a defense analytics firm called Meridian Systematics, where for probably about the last 6 or 7 years, a lot of us have lived in the Middle East and just concerned with policy and guidance from the decision makers, ultimately, our commander-in-chief, the president, on how that impacts our troops out forward and the legalities and regulations that we have to abide by, and the things that we get ourselves involved in overseas with policy. As a defense analyst and a manager of other analysts, I'm just concerned with how they're able to support our warfighters and the people that we care about most downrange. So that's what we do, and that's why I'm here today, is just because I'm interested and concerned with this election season, and just glad to be here.
All right, thanks, AJ. Dan, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Okay, I'm a retired Marine. I retired in 2013. I was an infantryman my whole career, except for a couple years at Paris Island as a drill instructor, and another couple years at Officer Candidate School in Virginia as a drill instructor for officer candidates. My early experience in the Marine Corps was as a mortarman. I chose to stay as an infantryman as I got to that rank of gunnery sergeant where everybody has to choose a career path. And I liked being an infantryman, and I chose that path, and I stuck with it. During the time I was in the Marine Corps, I operated in a whole bunch of different environments, including the Marine Expeditionary Unit environment, and then just regular deployments, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Central America, the Balkans, humanitarian operations in Turkey and Haiti, and in the Far East. So I just had a wide range of combat and other types of operations, pretty much on every continent except for Antarctica. So.
And now your full-time job is...
And now my full-time job is...
keeping two bulldogs from ripping apart
your
house.
And I'm probably going to start doing this blogging stuff because it looks like it's a lot of fun. Chance to talk bad about people.
All right, great. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to the topic of the day. And this is, who do you plan on voting for president? And your number one reason why. And we'll just go ahead and start off by stating what that is, and then we'll go ahead and I'll ask you to go more in depth about that, and then we'll follow up by allowing each other to ask the other panelists a question or give a comment on that opinion. So I'll go ahead and start off with you, AJ. Who do you plan on voting for, and your number one reason why?
All right. Yeah, thank you. I thought about this question. I mean, I've been thinking about this question for many months as we watch all of this unfold. And historically, I'm a conservative. I've always been voted conservative, and there's never been really a second in the past where I would have ever considered voting for Clinton. But on the other hand, at this moment, I'm embarrassed as a Republican that Trump has made it as far as he has. I believe that, like a lot of Americans who are still baffled and can't make up their minds on which choice is the lesser of two evils, and I wish this was the time we had a decent libertarian maybe as a backup. But what I care about most are the characteristics that make up ultimately our commander-in-chief that we're talking about, the guy that's in charge of all of our guys downrange, and the policy that gets put forward, and that is going to be overseeing the people that we care about. And at this moment, I'm almost dumbfounded just watching the characteristics and the traits that aren't being displayed for what we want to see as a leader and what we're trained to see as a leader from the military. All the attributes like the loyalty, maturity, selfless service, integrity, humility, empathy, like the list goes on and on. But the vast majority of these traits aren't displayed by our current candidates. So that's what's making it extremely difficult.
So, so right now you are undecided because none of the candidates display personal characteristics that a commander-in-chief should have.
Yeah, anybody that you want to have as a leader and that you can really rally behind is like when you're trained in the military, your expectations of how you're going to conduct yourself and the same expectations fall on the leadership, and the rhetoric and the history of both candidates don't reflect that whatsoever, in my opinion.
So we'll go into a little bit more detail. Let me ask Dan about his opinion. So, who do you plan on voting for, and what is your number one reason why?
Well, as of this moment, and I say this hesitatingly, but as of this moment, I'm planning on voting for Hillary Clinton. The main reason for that is, surprisingly enough, when you talk to Marines, there's very few of us that are registered Democrats. I've been a registered Democrat for a long time. My voting history was, I grew up in a fundamental Christian environment. Everybody was in love with Reagan. I voted for Reagan the first time, and I was very quickly disillusioned because of things that were going on back then. And the next time I voted for a Republican is I did vote for George W. Bush in 2000. But once again, I was very, very disappointed with the way they handled foreign policy, the economy, everything. I'm disillusioned with the Republican Party, going back to Reagan, because they don't live up to the promises they make. And I understand that, it's a matter of opinion, but if you look at economic factors and you look at foreign policy factors, Democratic presidents in the last 30 years have done a better job. Hillary Clinton is a very flawed candidate. My biggest hesitation with voting for her is that there's going to be extreme opposition in Congress to anything she tries to do, just like there's been extreme opposition in President Obama's term. But to say that I'm going to cave and be part of the system that creates dysfunction, I can't do it. So I have to go with the party and the leader who I think is best capable of moving us forward. And hopefully she can overcome the opposition that she's going to face, but I don't know. It's going to be an ugly 4 years.
So what's the number one reason then that you plan on voting for?
Because I think that the democratic system, the policies and the procedures used by Democrats to govern, militarily, foreign policy-wise, economically, are better for the country.
So it's not a personal reason for her. It is your belief that the Democratic Party will better govern the country.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my opinion. I am undecided. I have an idea. I will probably vote for Clinton, but I would say the number one reason that I may not is Benghazi, and I've talked with generals and diplomats who have worked behind the scenes with her that speak highly of her leadership ability, but I have a friend who worked for the agency that was in Benghazi and in Libya. And he got shit-canned. He got pulled from country because he sent an official cable to the State Department telling them that they had to increase the security at the site or there was going to be bad consequences. And the reaction was politics. Politics from the State Department in D.C., Officials there contacted the bosses in the agency, which is highly politicized, and they pulled him from country. Who knows? Maybe it saved his life. But the reality is that that political environment exists, and I'm not saying that it doesn't exist with Republicans. It's just incumbent on whoever's leading a section of government to overcome the desire to appease the political aspects of leadership as opposed to doing what's right. And so that's my opinion. So now we'll ask AJ for you to go into a little bit more detail of what it is about the personal characteristics that are going to keep you from, or keep you from voting from all of them.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to, and that's one of the most irritating things at this moment is, like, I mean, obviously, like the freedoms like you fight for and the rights and everything like that. Obviously you want to get out there and you're going to vote, and you're forced to ultimately come to a conclusion across the things that like what you just talked about. Like, her resume and the amount of experience she has, just without the amount of years in politics. But at the same time, there's enough marks on the resume, such as Benghazi and things like in the clearance environment, things that myself and other people would be canned in a heartbeat for doing a fraction of the things that she has done and gotten away with. And I mean, there's a lot of concern for things in her history and how she's handled plenty of situations that are not minor things by any means, but and the character, and on her side, the dishonesty and the integrity that you can bold face go in front of Congress and say things. I mean, it's just that's not a reflection of something that I want to be a part of. And then on the other side, Trump, you can go on forever, but there isn't any substance to any of the solutions that he's really put forward, besides the character that he's kind of displayed. And I mean, in the last 24 hours, just videos released with the Days of Our Lives and stuff like that he's been caught up in. It all does reflect
grabbing when the video where he talks about grabbing women by the pussy.
Yeah, it's, incredible. And to think that this is people that are able to routinely make these kind of statements, that you're going to put them in that position of power and leadership ultimately over all these federal agencies and the troops and the policies that impact us at home. And something else that has been a massive, I'm from Arizona initially. I'm in Virginia now, but I'm a born and raised Arizonan. I was in the Air Force for about 6 years in Arizona as well. And I did a lot of analytics on border states for quite a while, working with Homeland Security. So living and working in border states, you understand the issues with immigration and the bankruptcy that they basically face with their hands tied from the federal government. And you'll understand the outrage from those states, even when Janet Napolitano, before she was with DHS as a secretary, she was the governor of Arizona as a Democrat in a Republican state, and people had a bipartisan approach to immigration because there was no denying the traumatic effect of immigration on a state like Arizona. Regardless of the border crime, obviously all the violence, the narcotics, the smuggling of people, and the hardships and the amount of people that are just transiting through, but what that does to an economy and the school system and the hospitals. And being from Southern Arizona, you'll experience that a little bit quicker than Northern Arizona, since it's the flow of people. But so you want to see traumatic. It takes a lot of change something big has to happen just to make an impact on immigration policy. So I can understand why a lot of your border folks could rally behind Trump in a sense, but ultimately, at the end of the day, when you just say, I'm going to build a wall, I can go off of that, but for a million reasons why I'm not supportive of that idea. But when there's no substance behind it, and you don't see the policy unfold and how is this actually going to take place, and there is nothing that I can rally behind. And when it's compiled with the characteristics of that kind of show what kind of person he is, that just disappoints you a little bit more. But so it's a rock and a hard place. It's the lesser of two evils that you kind of go with, and there's massive things you have to consider between both candidates, and hopefully in a week or two, maybe I'm going to take every minute I have to just keep thinking about it and who ultimately is going to put forth some decisions that are going to impact what we care about most. So,
all right, sounds good. Dan, what's your opinion on, or your explanation for why you think the Democratic Party Clinton will represent the Democratic Party in running the government more effectively?
Okay. Well, first, let's just take a little background. My first disillusionment with the Republicans and the State Department, what you're talking about, is over Beirut in 1983. I'm not going to go into a lot of history there, but there was actually 2 bombings in Beirut, and a lot of people don't know about any of them, but a lot of Marines only know about the bombing of the Marine barracks. There was actually a bombing at the American Embassy. There was a very deadly bombing weeks or months prior to the bombing of the Marine barracks, and it was a horrendous event. Now, I wasn't personally in Beirut at the time. I never got near Beirut during that era. But as people came out with the after actions, the lessons learned, and everything, it was an intelligence failure. Not that the intelligence didn't predict the bombing, but that the leaders, primarily the American ambassador who was in charge in Beirut, who was controlling the entire operation for the Republicans, didn't want to put the Marines on a war footing. He didn't want to do things at the embassy that would make it look like he was creating a threatening force in Beirut. Hence, when they bombed the embassy, it was an easy target. Totally gaffed off the intel. There was more intel indications about the attack on the barracks. The ultimate failure at the barracks was that the guards couldn't stop the drivers because they weren't allowed to have loaded weapons. That's when the Marine Corps came up with a policy that you're never going to be anywhere in harm's way without a loaded weapon and defend yourself. But they couldn't stop the truck because they didn't have ammunition in their weapons. And that was a Republican ambassador policy. And that's when I really became disillusioned with the Republican Party. But it just continued. When you compare the economic factors from Reagan up until now, the Republican cut taxes and still spend a lot of money program that they've done is totally contrary to what they talk to about fiscal conservatism. Now, if they cut taxes, which I agree is really good for the American people, and they cut spending, we would have a totally different economic situation right now. I'm not going to go into the Reagan stuff on that. I'll just talk about how we start a war on 2 different continents and give the biggest tax cut in the history of the United States at the very same time. The most expensive war, the most expensive tax cuts at the exact same time. And then you want to sit here and talk about how Obama has the biggest debt in history. You're right. Under Obama, the debt in America is the biggest it's ever been. But let's look at all the root causes. Let's go online and research and find out who created how much debt, why we have this debt. There's things like the economic impact of doing things like investing in the auto industry. A lot of people were mad about the bailout of the banks, the bailout of the auto industry. If you look at the results of those bailouts, you see that it was a smart choice. So those are just some of the things that I believe in about, the overall arching principles pushed by the Democratic Party that I think are what we still need to focus on. We're on the verge of finishing the recovery we could have had 4, 5, 6 years ago. We've gotten to it a lot slower than we needed to. But I think that if we switch direction now, especially with the economy, is we're going to go back downhill. We're not going to go back uphill. I don't think that the Trump policies can fix this nation economically. I also don't believe the nation is in the economic disaster that he's talking about. I also don't believe that the armed forces are in the state of disrepair that he claims. And I also don't believe that our position overseas is as bad as he claims it is. There's just, right now, the Republican policy, the Republican propaganda is, in my opinion, fear-mongering. I don't think America's in a great position, but I believe it's a lot better off than what the Republicans will give Obama credit for. And, I mean, we talk about jobs. The September jobs report's out. It's a lot better than what Trump would have you believe it is.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I guess it's my turn. Tying back into what I said about Benghazi, I think the biggest reason why I won't vote for Clinton is because I believe that the Democratic Party is corrupted. It's a machine, and I mean so is the Republican Party. But when I got out of the Marines in 2004, I was so disillusioned with Iraq and the policies that I saw firsthand that I became an avid Democrat, and I invested a lot in that. And then, having done that, working more towards the inside of the party, I found that it's a machine, and it will spit you out, chew you up and spit you out. And as a veteran, that was really highly insulting. I believe that a lot more good can come from the policies of the Democratic Party, but because it's so corrupted, I feel like, if I vote for Trump and he's elected, he's such an absolutely insane candidate that it would force the Democratic Party to look at itself and go, whoa, maybe we fucked up big time. Maybe we shouldn't have shafted the Sanders supporters and thought that, as a machine, we knew what was best for the country. So that's something I'm still debating too. I just have to weigh whether or not Trump would be like such a disaster for this country that there'd be no turning back, almost like a Nero or Caligula figure. I don't know.
And that's difficult too. And that's something that I've been thinking about, is like, okay, how do you calculate the risk of, like, you can define Clinton, you can predict things she will and won't be involved in at home, overseas. And on the other hand, it's Trump's the wild card, and if some people vote for him because they want to have him represent the giant middle finger to the political atmosphere, then they might accomplish it. But at the other hand, it's there's so many blank spaces with Trump that it's a gamble that you don't know how far, in what direction anything could head, since there hasn't been any defined context for a lot of his statement for how things will actually take place. And I think he does leverage the not the dream or the idea in a lot of people's minds that are like, say that, like, the immigration aspect, they know there has to be incredible change to take place, like in that environment for the states to get what they need to get done for immigration, for a plan being set forth and any conversation going behind it. It's pretty much non-existent. And likewise, for if it's his foreign policy of how is he actually going to deal with countries A, B, and C. He said a few things about trade deals and whatnot, but I think there's an empty space that people can fill in. It's kind of like dating, like maybe like I always think of it like okay, it's a bad ex-girlfriend. You're dealing with, like, when you first meet her, you don't know enough about her. So you're going to fill in that blank space with, like, your own ideas, right? So you're thinking of all these great things, like, oh, like you can imagine like, oh, she's probably like this, and you're optimistic about it. And it could go one way or another, and you just don't know. And it likely could be a horrible ex-girlfriend. And that's kind of how I've perceived Trump. And you mix that in the pot with basically all the other statements that have been made and everything else. But that's one thing that I think he has going for him, is that since he isn't defined and he doesn't have a long history in a lot of these aspects, people kind of fill in the gap with the fact that there's a wild card, and there's a small chance that it could go their way. But
that's one side of the political debate that we haven't really seen, which I really appreciate, is that analytical side, and the really colorblind aspect to it. You've worked from the inside, and seen the policies that Clinton and actions that she's enacted as Secretary of State, and as a senator, and so forth. And so you have this idea of what will come, and it's not necessarily that good. And then you've got Pandora's box with Trump, and then you have to weigh the two sides to that. And I think it's, as opposed to screaming at one another, it's really interesting to have to weigh those two options and say, if I roll the dice with one, is it likely that the benefits will be greater than the other?
Right. And say, are you a gambling man, or do you want to go with the status quo of kind of knowing what you're going to be set up for? But
Well, one of the things that irks me about all sides of politics right now, from Congress to the White House to state houses and everywhere, is that nobody has simple solutions to things anymore. Now, let's talk about the immigration thing just for a second, because like you said, that was important to you when you're living in Arizona, and you still see the importance. And I agree. Immigration used to be a really simple thing until they started adding all these crazy rules to it. Now, taxes used to be a really simple thing until they started adding all these crazy rules to it. With the Republicans, with the Democrats, we're never going to get to the point where they cut out the forest worth of paper that run the IRS, so the forest worth of paper that run the Department of Homeland Security. It'd be great if we could, but my ideal candidate would be somebody who has knowledge of the system and the capability to come in and simplify. Not add new layers of law on top of old layers of law that aren't working. We need to go back to like a 1960s, 1970s version of immigration to make it work. And it needs to not just be focused on the immigrants, it needs to be focused on the reason they're coming here. The reason they come here is because people will hire them. People hire them because they will do the work. So those are the issues that need to be addressed as much as, for immigration. And we need to see immigration as a workforce issue. And then we need to address the things like the drug issue on the border as a totally separate thing. I think a lot of times we get them confused because there seems to be this big overlap. Coyotes run drugs, coyotes run people. And that's the overlap. But dealing with the drug issue needs to be separate than dealing with the immigration problem. People in California, Arizona, all the way up into Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska depend on immigrant labor for doing everything from picking apples and oranges to doing the wheat harvest. So how do we meet that need for the employers without them having to break the law?
And that goes back into what we were talking about, is how do you weigh the benefit of one?
And how do you simplify it? And that's the thing that I don't see with either party. I would like somebody to come along who has the knowledge and experience to simplify and get us back on track. And until we eliminate all these layers of bullshit, we're not going to be able to, Democrats ain't going to be able to sit down with the Republicans and talk, because we're not talking about the basic facts. We're talking about the stacks of bullshit that we've stacked on top of each other.
What were you going to say, AJ?
I was just saying, yeah, and I'm not even sure. I agree completely, and I just don't know if we'll see that at the federal level because, and the states uh, I mean, like in the military, when you have commanders and they go out into different areas of responsibility, right? And then they have people under them, and they require, just to make them operational, they need to be autonomous and have their own authorities. And they can't just push everything back up the chain to get approval on everything that they do. Otherwise, they'll just have their hands tied, and then they can't effectively manage the space and all of the horrible things going on in that space themselves. So, and that's always I've seen, like Arizona, New Mexico, and definitely parts of Texas that, I mean, have tremendous problems that while their hands are tied from the federal government, and they butt heads. And Arizona is one of the states that in many years past has always been butting heads with the federal government, trying to enact laws and whatnot, because they're just trying to figure out a solution themselves. But they are, if you call it their battle space, they're the battle space owners, and they understand their problems more than the federal government ever will. So when you have a community that's so high up, and how in tune are they really with all the issues that are going on? And there's a lot of different, I mean, just border crime to narcotics to the actual transient, just the movement of people. Those are all separate issues, and they've gone after a few. There used to be a program called Operation Jumpstart. There's a lot of border state governors that came together, activated National Guard reservists to augment Customs Border Patrol, and also they actually built a wall along a lot of the border, which was just a vehicle barrier to stop a lot of the narcotics traffic. And even at a high level, you get ideas and a tremendous amount of funding pushed to a huge operation that goes on for many years, cost a ton of money. So they built up pylons, steel pylons. I can't remember if they're 16 or 18 feet tall, but massive pylons spaced out every couple of feet between mountain ranges to stop narcotic and weapons trafficking and all sorts of stuff, ultimately for security, because there's tons of stuff every minute of the day moving back and forth across the border that we have no idea about. So they built this massive wall of vehicle pylons in the name of just to make it more secure. And it was the same week that they finished a section in Southwest Arizona. We found out that they were already driving massive teeter-totters that they constructed and driving Chevy Avalanches over this massive wall of pylons. And it took them less than a week to basically countermeasure this wall that we've built, because the manpower it would actually take and the equipment and the technology to monitor the entire border is just too incredible.
Well, I think we found our next topic for the panel discussion, but we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Right,
so, going forever about that. So I'd like to thank you both for contributing, and hopefully, next time we'll have more to offer and continue the discussion. So thanks again.
Thanks for having us, though. Yeah, it's good.
Nice meeting you, AJ.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Dan.